In tonight's Dateline Defense, Europe's migrant crisis. For weeks, we've been following the wave of refugees fleeing the Middle East and Northern Africa. Now the European Union has pledged to do more to help, but what will it take? For insight, we turn to our guest tonight on Capitol Insider, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer. He's a CIA-trained Senior Intelligence Operations Officer, best-selling author, and Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research.
Hey, Morris.
Tony, France and the UK have announced they will accept a combined 44,000 migrants as part of the growing crisis facing the EU.
Right.
Meanwhile, other nations like Germany and Hungary are being flooded with refugees seeking safety from their war-torn homes. How will Europe handle this influx of people? Where will they all go?
Well, a lot of the European countries, Morris, have been, for any number of reasons, reluctant to take them. Their hand's been finally forced. And they had to take them by the fact that they had nowhere else to go. This was predicted. I mean, we've talked about this as long as 18 months ago about the fact that if you allowed ISIS to continue to gain ground, you would see an inevitable flow of individuals out of the war zone. Here we are.
Yep.
And I think, notably, I think what should be done, what the Europeans should do, is plan for temporary residence. That is to say that, look, you're coming here, you have no place else to go, but there needs to be a plan to return them. And to return them, obviously, Morris, that means you have to defeat ISIS. And so that part is still TBD, so to speak. We don't have a plan to do that. But
I'll get to that in a second,
Sure.
but let's keep talking. The United States might also take on some of the burden with
Correct.
the Obama administration considering ways to help. What role, if any, should the U.S. play?
Well, a great deal. I mean, again, we're responsible for this. We saw ISIS coming. We did nothing. Let me be clear on this. We had a meeting 2.5 years ago, Morris, on Capitol Hill, where we outlined a plan to invoke Article 5 via Turkey so we could do a 10-mile incursion into Syria, set up a safe zone for refugees to come and sit. So they had a safe place to sit during the war. We could take care of them. We could launch operations out of there and not have this displacement. Again, we did this 2.5 years ago. Republican leadership was in the room, but we did nothing. So we, as the United States, have a great deal of responsibility because, first off, we helped destabilize the region by not helping take care of ISIS rapidly, and more importantly, when we saw this coming, and many of us saw it coming, we did nothing to prevent it. So I think we should do more as much as we can. I think we should take some of the refugees in, but not everything.
Now, the influx of migrants into countries like Greece and Germany has also caused a rise in hate crimes.
Correct.
And the dislike of foreigners. With more refugees expected to arrive, do you see the situation turning violent?
Especially in Germany. Yeah, I was talking to a close friend last night about Germany. Germans, while they're taking them, do not like it. And I think there's a fundamental problem with a very nationalistic attitude right now. I think you will see violence. Frankly, I think you're going to see violence by those coming. Let's be clear on this. ISIS has said that they're putting individuals into the refugee pipeline. So there's no doubt that as you see violence on both sides, you will see acts of terror perpetrated by those who have been essentially sleepers, recruited by ISIS to go under the stream of refugees, and you'll see acts of violence.
All right, let's talk more about ISIS.
Sure.
Many analysts say the clear and obvious answer is to fix what's going on in Syria and Iraq. For months, the U.S. has been leading a bombing campaign against ISIS. Tony,
right.
Is it time for the Obama administration to consider more action, and should other countries deploy ground troops?
We do, both. First, the air campaign is essentially a joke. We're talking about 3 to 5, maybe 8 sorties a day. Half those come back with weapons still on the aircraft. We're not going after their training grounds. We're not going any way seriously about their banking. We're not doing our job. Regarding ground forces, yes, we've talked about this. We've been talking about it with leaders on the Hill. It's time for an Arab NATO. The Arabs need to self-organize, self-motivate, and go in there and clean house to reestablish essentially good governance so people can go back in there. And let's be clear on this. The people leaving, Morris, are peace-loving people. And we're talking about Christians, we're talking about Yazidi, we're talking about Assyrians, we're talking about all sorts of groups who have never traditionally picked up and been violent. The Kurds, for example. And yet they're being displaced because of inaction by us and others where we clearly could do something to settle the situation. We're not doing everything we can or should.
Now, one person who may soon get involved in the conflict in Syria is Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russian military experts are reportedly in the region trying to figure out a way to keep Bashar Assad in power.
Correct.
What does Putin have to lose if Assad is overthrown?
Well, quite a bit. I mean, right now the Russians have invested heavily both in his regime, essentially, in Syria, plus they have a port that they use in Syria. And more importantly, what they have to lose is influence. They've made Syria a clear foreign policy objective where they're going to stick in there and help Assad because of their own interests. And this is something significant. They do plan to increase their presence there by potentially the deployment of real Russian troops. And I said this on your show about a year ago, and here we are. I said that you may well see the Russian version of the A-10, the Su-25 Frogfoot, rolling in sorties against ISIS. And here we are a year later, and we're now near the possibility of that very thing happening.
So you think Putin will play a hand in fighting ISIS, and how would that work? Will the U.S. also fight the terrorist group in the region?
Strange bedfellows, but absolutely.
Really?
I think we all overlap on ISIS right now. The Iranians, the Iraqis, the Syrians, and us. I think we have to take this seriously, and that may be the first thing we all have to deal with is ISIS. Clearly, again, you need to stop the refugee movement. You need to stop that happening. You need to defeat ISIS. The best way to do that is again, like World War II, put together a unified front to at least defeat ISIS as quickly as you can.
Real quick before we go on the refugee situation, why isn't Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, why aren't some of those Gulf nations helping?
Excellent question, because the same reason we're reluctant, because of the fact that you're going to have radicalized individuals in that refugee stream. I'm one of those who have suggested to Congress we should force Saudi Arabia and those other Arab nations to take these folks. These individuals have similar cultures, they have similar language, they should be staying as close to home as possible so you don't have to bring them all back. With that said, obviously these nations are as worried as we are about radicalization, about the terrorists being in the stream, and therefore they don't want to take the refugees.
It's good to get your insight. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer, Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Morris.